Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome. Thank you so much for coming. Shall we get started? So for those of you that don't know me, my name is Eric Malice. I am the co-founder here at National Test Systems and also the Chief Product Officer. I've been in business for a little over coming up on 22 years. And ever since my brother and I started this company way back then, I've always had much more interest in the technical side of things. You know, my brother was good at sales. He could manage inventory and billing and all that fun business related stuff that honestly, I had zero interest in. But I really had a lot of interest in all things drug testing. I wanted to know how the tests functioned. I wanted to know how the drugs themselves interacted with the human body. I wanted to know everything I could about clinical toxicology, especially as it relates to what we're doing to drug testing. So luckily, we have an opportunity here. We have a company here who feels as strongly about knowledge as I do. And because of that, they allow me to oversee this incredible educational platform that they've helped develop. Listen, anyone can sell you a cup, but there is a certain amount of expertise needed for this item. We're not selling you bed sheets or toner for your printer. These things do have a technical side. And it is good to have support and education in order to make your daily drug testing duties a little easier, or at least a little bit more insightful. So we have another in our series of what we call NTS University educational webinars. And we provide these to you. Again, we think it's hugely important to educate as many people as are willing to listen to me talk for 15, 20 minutes, every other month or so. And we see by the number of attendees so far that, that people appreciate that and they do want to learn. So we're right on that side of things. And I'm so glad for that. And I see some familiar names here. So some of you guys felt there was good enough benefit in this that you would give up 15 minutes to 30 minutes of your day to get informed. And I love that. I'm so thankful to all of you guys who show up to these things and support it. We just think it's hugely important. It's in our DNA to make these things for you, to provide education for you. We don't want to charge you for it because we think it's helpful information. So keep that in mind. And this is what I do. I'm either researching to teach you guys or I am doing trainings. So again, education, hugely important. So basically, we have about 15-ish minutes today on our presentation, after which I will handle any questions that come in. If you look on the left pane of the window here, we have the first button says people. Below that, we have questions. If you would use that questions tab for your questions. I am going to wait till the end of the presentation before I start with the questions, but you can enter your question at any time if you want to get in line. Below that, you see chats. I see some people use that saying, hey, audio issue, somebody help me. Whatever you guys want to use chats for, that's fine. But if you would keep your questions in the questions section, that way I make sure we get to them all. Now, if for some reason that we're unable to get to everybody's question today, just know that your consultant will be reaching out to you in the coming days. And at that point, obviously, we'll get to any questions that might have been missed. But they'll also give you an opportunity to, for training, either one-on-one or with you and your staff. And it could either be on this topic or another topic that we feel would be helpful to you guys. You could request a redo of this. You could request a deep dive into one aspect of this. Really anything that you would find helpful, let me know and we'll do it. And keep this in mind also, we tend to have, we tend to not want to take too much of your time on these when we invite you to us. Now, if you wanted to do an hour presentation, wanted me to do an hour presentation, that's great. I can give you an hour on pretty much any topic, but that needs to be something that you request from me. If I'm going to take an hour of your time, I want it to be because you are telling me that you want that hour. So a lot of people would like to see deeper dives on some of the areas of conversation that we're doing today, and I understand that. Let's schedule it. I do it this way intentionally so that I don't monopolize your time. You guys have jobs to do, so do I. So on that note, let's get started. So what are we talking about today? Today, we're going to be discussing opiates, opioids, and a little bit about what make the two different. This is part of the series that we call KYS, or Know Your Substance. It's good to every now and then take a little bit more of a look at the substances that we test for daily to just get a better understanding of what they're all about. So let's talk about this subject here. So basically, an opioid is anything that interacts with the opioid receptors in your body that cause that effect that we're used to of opiates. And we'll definitely get a deeper dive on what those effects are. But really, anything that interacts with the opioid receptor in your body is an opioid. Now, opiate is a subclass of opioids, and an opiate generally refers to a naturally occurring opiate or naturally occurring substance that does the same thing as opioids. So as you can see on our graphic here, we've got natural, and again, they come from the latex ooze found in the opium poppy. And then we have semi-synthetic, which are modified versions of that natural ingredient. And then we have full synthetic. And again, we're going to break these down further so you know exactly what I'm talking about. But an easy way to remember it is, every giraffe is an animal, but not every animal is a giraffe. How about that? So every Chevy's a car, not every car is a Chevy, whatever you want to say. But again, opiate is basically a subclass of opioid. So where do they come from? So basically, the general name given to the substance that is produced naturally is called opium, and it consists of all the active ingredients of the opium poppy, which is actually known as the Papaver somniferum. I write that down because I always forget it. Basically, they are a class of flowers, and all of the parts of the plant, the seed, the flesh, the stem, contain opium or traces of opium. So basically, to give you an idea of where we get the somniferum, som, the prefix in somniferum is the Latin for sleep or dream. We see it in other words. You've heard of somnambulous, which means sleepwalking. You've heard of insomnia, inability to get to sleep. So we see that root word in a lot of our modern language today revolving around sleep. So it's very common. For example, we won't have to delve too far into som, but you get the idea on that. And basically, the effects of the poppy, obviously sleep bringing is a big part of it, but it basically does sedation, it does pain, and it does what's known as antitussive properties, which basically means just a cough suppressant. Another interesting root word there, tussive. You've heard of Robitussin, which is a medicine for cough suppression. So you're learning all the Latin root words today. I told you learned stuff. So yeah, it's used mainly for pain and antitussive properties. And listen, it's very important medication. For example, you've heard of the World Health Organization. Well, the WHO makes a list of what they consider to be essential medications. And basically what this means is if you are, let's say, Red Cross or Doctors Without Borders, and you're going to a disaster area, hurricane, earthquake, whatever it might be, World Health Organization says these are medications that you should have on hand if you're going to want to do your job, effectively. So out of all the opiates and opioids we'll be talking about today, both codeine and morphine are considered by the WHO to be essential medications. So there definitely has a lot of, important uses as medication. But with anything that has that much of a physical effect or physiological effect on you, it opens the door up for a lot of illicit use, illicit distribution, and of course, we all know it has a very high risk of abuse and dependency. It's the double-edged sword. You want medicine that's going to do what it needs to do, but you're also going to need a way to keep an eye on it or hopefully keep it in check so we don't end up with oxy epidemic, then fentanyl epidemic, and back to back to back. Hopefully nip it in the bud at some point. And then lastly, as far as the actual area they come from, typically found in Southwest Asia, India, Afghanistan, Pakistan, that area there. So I have this slide that I put together for you for a brief history of opioids. But I'm not going to go too deep on it. And this is one of those parts where I say, if you want a deeper dive on something, great example of this. I could give you an hour on the opium wars or the Silk Road trading. There's just so much information. It's a really big rabbit hole if you start to go down there. But the reason I did include this slide, well, two reasons. One is a lot of folks like to get a copy of the slideshow after these. By the way, if you need that, simply request it. We'll get that out to you. And the main thing I really wanted to point out is the earliest reference to opium and to poppies was in 3400 BC. So this is not a new find by any stretch. People have been using, misusing, or using for medicine, for over 5,000 years, or up almost 5,000 years. So there's a lot of background here that, again, could be its own webinar. Every one of those little boxes could probably be their own webinar. So again, I want to try and get you good information that's useful. But if you ever want to do a deeper dive, just simply let us know, and we'll make sure that happens. So harvesting. When we talk about harvesting, we're talking about the original harvesting and probably how it's still done in the illicit industry, if you want to call it an industry. Basically, it's harvested by hand. These days, big pharmaceutical companies, when they're making medication to put out millions of pills a year, they're not walking through the field using this method. They're just processing these things en masse. Again, like I said in the beginning, every part of the poppy does contain opium. So you want to squeeze out every last active morsel that you can, as it were. So basically, the way it was traditionally harvested is the first person would go down the row of flowers. You can kind of see the row of pods here before they open, and would make small slices into the flesh, cuts in the flesh. And then someone would wait a few minutes and walk behind them, and all the sap that had oozed out, that is your pure opium. So that sap is also sometimes called latex. It's also sometimes called milk. If you've heard of milk of the poppy, if you've watched Game of Thrones, you've certainly heard of milk of the poppy. Or if you read A Song of Ice and Fire, bonus points to you on that one. My readers that. And once they've collected, they process it. They process to get the specific target substance that they're looking for. The target they're looking for is actually called an alkaloid, and we're going to get into that in a second. The other reason I've repeated twice now that every part of the poppy contains opium is because we eat poppy seeds regularly in this country. Most cultures do eat poppy seeds. Now, they do take some steps to wash them, as they call it, so they don't contain as high an opium content. But the Seinfeld story is true. You definitely will test positive for eating poppy seeds. And in fact, if you eat enough poppy seeds, you will get high. If you want to go to the website, our website, we have a blog posted. It was my experimentation with some local foods, poppy bagel, poppy sandwich, and my lab results. And you can see exactly what I'm talking about. If I showed it to a toxicologist, they would never be able to determine that they were from poppy seeds, just positive for morphine and codeine. So, be aware that is definitely a real thing. All right, so let's break this down further. I mentioned the word alkaloids at least twice so far. So let me tell you exactly what those are. Basically, an alkaloid is any of a class of nitrogenous, meaning it contains at least one atom of nitrogen, any class of nitrogenous organic compounds of plant origin, which have pronounced physiological actions on humans. So the alkaloids in here, we've got morphine, active ingredient is another word for that. So in other words, it has a very pronounced physiological effect on humans. So it is an alkaloid of this plant. Same with codeine, same with thebaine, and there are two others, one called noscapine and one called papaverin. Those were all the 5 active alkaloids in the opium poppy. To give you a comparison, when you think of alkaloids, kratom, everyone's probably heard of kratom. The active alkaloid, the part of that plant that has the physical effect, the part that gets you high, is the metragenine. That is the primary alkaloid of the Mitragynia speciosa plant that we talk about when we're talking about kratom. So the alkaloids, when we talk about any plant matter, is the part that gets you high, basically, for simple sake. So again, as we're talking about opiates first on this page, opiates are all the naturally occurring alkaloids that are found in the latex or the sap of the opium poppy. We've all heard of morphine. They give it in the hospital for pain, obviously, usually with surgery, or if you've got another acute issue. Codeine is a milder opiate, again, naturally occurring from the opium poppy. And that one you'll find, Tylenol 3, Tylenol 4, a lot of cough medication has codeine to enhance that antitussive effect that I mentioned earlier. And then thebaine. Well, thebaine's the weakest of the 3 common alkaloids. Interestingly, the thebaine part of it is the one they use when they want to synthesize oxycodone, hydrocodone, and buprenorphine, among others. So the only, I don't want to call it an exception, the one opiate that seems to sometimes fall into this one class, sometimes fall into the semi-synthetic, is heroin. Now, technically, heroin is semi-synthetic because there is a chemical process that is involved in turning it from the opium to the diacetylmorphine, which is another name for heroin. But because that process is one that can occur naturally, oftentimes people will consider heroin to be a true opiate and not just a semi-synthetic, hence opioid. It's, tomato, tomato. It really doesn't matter necessarily. But since we were touching on the differences between the two, I thought I would bring that as the odd man out. And then for our opioids, again, these are different only in that they're synthetic or semi-synthetic. They have the same effect on the opioid receptors in the body, different levels of intensity or effectiveness, that sort of thing. But they're all basically doing the same thing. So we have our semi-synthetics, and again, these were taken from the thebaine, the active alkaloid from our poppy, and that's where they make oxycodone, which you've heard of, OxyContin. We'll have hydromorphone, which is sometimes called a dilaudid, probably a better known name on that. Buprenorphine, the active ingredient, Suboxone and Subutex. Then we have oxymorphone, which is Opana, another prescription medication. And then hydrocodone, which is something like Vicodin, for example. And then we have our full synthetics. And again, these are made strictly from chemicals. They do not use any of that naturally occurring, plant organic alkaloid to be made. They're strictly made in the laboratory. That's another reason, by the way, I can talk about this when we talk about fentanyl. The reason fentanyl is such a popular synthetic or popular opioid to hit the streets is you need a whole field, you need acres and acres to grow enough poppies to make enough heroin to sell. You can make fentanyl in an office this size, and you make enough to profit. So that's a big part of the reason why fentanyl's become so much more popular than heroin these days. It just doesn't require as much space for production. So that's good to know as well. And then that last note on here says nearly 88% of opioid involved overdose deaths involve synthetic opioids. And we know that because, we don't, if you talk to people in the street who were primarily heroin users, by most reports, there's not much actual heroin out on the street anymore. So we expect everything to be either semi or purely synthetic these days, especially as far as our overdose issues. All right, let's talk about testing or detection of opiates or opioids. So we did discuss, obviously, how each one of these are a little bit different. Even though they're trying to do the same thing, they are different in their chemical structure. So that's why you have a different test for opiates, and you have a different test for oxycodone. You have a different test for methadone. You have a different test for fentanyl. Have a different test for hydrocodone. All these things. And again, even though they're trying to do the same thing, they have the same goal in what they're trying to do with the human body. They're different enough in their chemical structure and the way that your body metabolizes them that we do need to have each one have its own test for the most part. When the opiate test is nice because it's both codeine and morphine, the two naturally occurring ones, because that's where they're both the same in that regard. So for you, we're going to focus here on the opiates and the semi-synthetics. I'm not going to talk about the fentanyl, methadone, or tramadol, for example, when I talk about window detection. So for urine, the naturally occurring opiates are typically about 2 to 3 days detection time. The semi-synthetics, once we add oxy and hydrocodone, we're talking about probably up to 5 days detection time. Again, that was in urine. In saliva, we have our standard answer with saliva. 24 hours would be your maximum detection time. Hair and sweat are no different than their standard detection times. Hair is from 8 to 90 days. Sweat is about 5 days, a couple of days before the patch goes on, before it comes off. Same as always. Excuse me. And then surface testing. A lot of people still don't know this. surface testing can be done with any of these tests that we provide. Any of our urine tests you can use to test surfaces, solids, powders. You find a half a pill, you don't know what it is, you can use a regular fentanyl stick and see if it's fentanyl. You can use a little opiate stick and see if it's codeine or morphine. So keep in mind, if you're having issues where you've got surfaces, you're finding little baggies or residue elsewhere, this is something that can be done easily. And I can give you a lesson on how to do it, but it's pretty simple. It's good to have around, especially for things like xylazine, or if you just any harm reduction in general. It's good to know these things can do that. All right, looks like we have a couple of questions up here, so let's see what we've got here. Can Vivitrol show up on the opiate U8 test? No, Vivitrol should not show up on that. However, naltrexone, which is the active ingredient of Vivitrol, can cause a cross reaction, a false positive, on the oxycodone panel. So do keep that in mind. And again, when we talk about urine testing and all this stuff, we're talking about only the instant testing. Of course, a confirmation is not going to do that. So next question, Ronald asked, you said hydrocodone, does that mean that it won't show up on the oxy? Correct. There is perhaps some cross-reactivity between the hydrocodone and the opiate panel, but it's rare. It's rarely going to cause a positive. And again, we have a hydrocodone specific test for this very reason, because while it never became to epidemic levels like oxycodone did, it's still considered a drug of abuse. It's still prescribed widely, which means it gets diverted often. So yeah, if you're having hydrocodone concerns, just consider testing for hydrocodone if you want to make sure you're detecting it. In summary, what is the main difference between opiates and opioids? Because now we can use the term interchangeable. Sort of and sort of not. So in summary, the easiest version of it would be an opiate is an opioid is any substance that interacts with the opioid receptors in the human body. An opiate is a subclass of that, in that it does the same thing, except it is coming with naturally occurring alkaloids from the opium poppy. So hopefully that helps. Oh, I missed one other thing, guys. I'm sorry about this. I mentioned my poppy blog. I forgot. I actually posted it up here. The questions tab, you have polls, chats, and handouts. If you go to that handouts tab, you'll see a link there for should be a link. Maybe it doesn't work. You know what? I'm going to post a link right here in the chat. I apologize. I thought that link would actually do something if I put it there, but apparently it is not. So I'm going to go ahead and put the questions tab. Oh, I can't ask questions. I can chat though. All right, there's a direct link that I just put in the chats tab. I see some of the chats now. Yeah, no more poppy seed bagels, unless you want to. Make sure you're not testing, as if you are. So you should be okay. All right, looks like that's all the questions we have today. Listen, again, thank you guys so much. I know your time is important. We really, really do appreciate you taking that time and sharing with us. I think it's great. I'm really happy with this. So thank you all very much. Have a wonderful day. Until next time, keep on testing.